Prologue. Humanity did not flee terror in chaos, it departed with purpose and ceremony. After centuries of environmental collapse, war, and unsustainable growth, Terrans reached a final conclusion: their home could no longer support them. In response, they built the Arks, 112 massive generational starships, each a self-contained civilization with cities, ecosystems, and millions of people. These ships carried Terra's legacy into the stars with a unified mission: to terraform new worlds and ensure humanity's survival. As the Arks departed one by one, Terra faded into the distance, and eventually into myth. Over generations, the people of the Arks became something new, Arkbound, a civilization no longer tied to a homeworld, but to an endless journey through the void in search of one. Arc 20. The day the Ark fell. Arc 20 was never meant to land. It was not built to endure gravity, nor to rest upon soil, nor to survive the violent and unpredictable forces of a world beneath it. It was designed for something far greater than planetary existence, a self-sustaining civilization suspended in the void, a world meant to outlast generations, outlive memory, and move beyond the very idea of origin. It was a sovereign construct of steel, light, and absolute order. Its immense rings stretched across the darkness in flawless arcs, rotating with perfect synchronization as entire cities clung to their inner curves. Artificial skies glowed overhead in soft blues and distant suns, carefully crafted illusions of a home that no longer existed. Rivers flowed through engineered valleys, guided by systems that controlled every current. Wind moved only because it was instructed to move, and seasons changed because they had been programmed to change. Nothing within the Ark was left to chance. Transit lines carved radiant paths through districts that housed millions, while towers rose in deliberate symmetry, each one placed with calculated precision. Every structure served a function, and every system was maintained to ensure that function never failed. Life was not improvised within Arc 20. It was regulated. Every breath was accounted for, every resource was measured, and every citizen existed within a system designed to ensure continuity above all else. Purpose was not something one discovered. Purpose was assigned. The core defined existence. The Peace Corps preserved life through discipline and care. The Engineering Corps sustained the Ark's endless mechanical heartbeat. The Agriculture Corps fed its people through controlled ecosystems that never failed. The Pathfinder Corps looked outward toward stars that humanity might never reach. The Labor Corps built and maintained the unseen foundations that held everything together. The Guard Corps enforced protection and ensured that order remained intact. Above them all stood the Directorate, a system of governance created to balance power and prevent any one force from rising above the others. But balance requires limits. And limits began to disappear. The Chancellor had once been elected through that system, chosen by the people and trusted to lead. Over time, that trust eroded in ways that few initially recognized. Election cycles slowed, then slipped, and eventually disappeared entirely. At first, the changes were explained as temporary measures, necessary responses to growing instability. Emergency powers were introduced, then normalized, and finally expanded until they became the standard authority under which the Ark operated. Decisions no longer passed through councils or debate. They were issued from above, final and unquestioned. Opposition did not vanish in a single moment, but instead faded gradually into absence. Transfers removed individuals from their positions, reassignments relocated them beyond visibility, and records were altered or erased before questions could form. People disappeared first from their roles, then from the systems that tracked them, and eventually from memory itself. Silence spread through the Ark. That silence became fear. And fear gave way to resentment. The first to break that silence came from within the Guard Corps, where senior officers and veteran commanders still believed in structure rather than control. They requested review through official channels, then demanded it when those requests were ignored. They called for elections to be restored and for the system to return to what it had been designed to be. The Chancellor refused. Initially, his refusal came in the form of procedural delays and redirected authority, but it did not take long before the answer became absolute. There would be no election, no challenge, and no transfer of power. The Ark did not require change. It required obedience. When the Guard continued to push against that decision, the Chancellor responded with precision. He made an example. The act was swift and controlled, carried out within a secured chamber where those summoned believed they would be heard. There was no trial and no opportunity for defense. Gunfire ended the conversation, and the aftermath was contained with efficiency. Bodies were removed, records were rewritten, and the event was sealed within official silence. Despite the attempt at control, the Ark was too vast and too interconnected for the truth to remain hidden. People had seen enough to understand what had happened. Truth spread through the very systems meant to suppress it, moving through maintenance corridors, unauthorized data channels, and fragmented logs that refused to align with official reports. Engineers noticed inconsistencies, pathfinders tracked missing transmissions, and whispers moved faster than any controlled message ever could. Once the truth spread, it could not be contained. That moment became the spark. What followed was not rebellion. It was civil war. Lines formed quickly, not between strangers but between people who had once trusted one another. Neighbors turned against neighbors, colleagues stood on opposite sides, and friendships fractured under the weight of conflicting belief. The Ark turned inward on itself. Corridors that once carried life became battlefields. Bulkheads sealed entire populations into isolated sectors. Life support systems were rerouted, and atmospheric controls were weaponized. There were regions where oxygen was cut completely, leaving silence where breath once existed. Entire districts were flooded with heat, transforming living spaces into suffocating furnaces. Gravity systems were manipulated, turning stable environments into chaotic death traps. The Ark burned, not only with fire but with the very systems that had once sustained life now repurposed for destruction. Time lost its meaning as the conflict continued. Days blurred into weeks, and weeks dissolved into something that could no longer be measured. The coalition advanced through the chaos with persistence and intent, understanding that they did not need to reclaim the entire Ark. Their focus narrowed to a single objective. They needed the bridge. They needed control. They needed the Chancellor. When that moment came, and defeat stood at his door, the Chancellor did not surrender. Instead, he removed access. Command permissions were revoked across the Ark, override protocols were rewritten in real time, and fail-safe systems were turned into tools of control. The bridge sealed itself completely, cutting off all external access and leaving no possibility for intervention. Every system within Ark 20 bent inward to a single will. For a brief and unnatural moment, the Ark fell completely silent. There were no commands, no signals, and no responses. Then the engines changed. They did not stabilize or adjust thrust. They altered course. Ark 20 began to turn. At first, the movement was slow and almost imperceptible, but it quickly became unstoppable as a nearby world aligned with its trajectory. That world was uncharted, unprepared, and unforgiving. The coalition realized what was happening too late. They attempted to override the systems, to breach the bridge, and to regain control of the Ark, but their efforts meant nothing. The Ark no longer belonged to them. It belonged to one man. And he had chosen its fate. The descent began with fire. The sky tore open as Ark 20 broke through the atmosphere, and friction ignited its outer hull, transforming the massive structure into a burning object falling from the heavens. The first ring fractured under the strain. Cities collapsed as rotation destabilized, and structures tore themselves apart before impact even occurred. Transit lines snapped, vehicles were thrown into open space, and thousands of lives ended before anyone fully understood what was happening. The second ring shattered soon after, breaking apart into fragments that fell like meteors across the surface below. Inside the Ark, every system failed at once. Gravity shifted unpredictably, lights vanished, and systems overloaded beyond recovery. Then the ground rose to meet them. The impact came in waves, each one more devastating than the last. The first strike crushed entire lower sectors. The second drove the Ark deeper into the planet's surface. The third broke what remained of its structure. Metal did not simply break. It screamed through vibration and force, tearing through everything it touched. Cities folded inward, districts collapsed, and entire sections of the Ark transformed into deadly debris. Walls became shrapnel, floors inverted into ceilings, and ceilings collapsed into graves. When it ended, there was no immediate aftermath. There was only silence. Not peace, but an absence so complete it felt unreal. Over half the population was gone. They were not missing, and they were not scattered. They were simply gone. Ark 20 had not landed. It had crashed. Despite the destruction, the planet did not finish what the Chancellor had begun. The atmosphere stabilized enough to sustain life, even if it remained harsh and unfamiliar. The ground shifted instead of resisting, allowing the Ark to embed itself rather than shatter completely. Dense jungle growth absorbed portions of the impact, with roots and soil altering the trajectory of falling debris. The catastrophic storms that should have followed never came. There was no planetary collapse and no extinction event. There was only stillness. The survivors stood among wreckage, fire, and the remains of everything they had lost, struggling to understand what had happened and why they were still alive. The truth settled slowly. They had not survived because they were stronger. They had survived because the world had allowed it. And so they named the world a name which to them meant they had survived the worst and that they have hope for a future. They named it Novaris. A world they will soon come to find out can be as dangerous as drifting in the void. A world they will find out they will have to earn their stay. This ends the prologue of Ark 20, but the Ark 20 journey has just begun. If you enjoyed it so far and want to hear more, please like, comment, and subscribe for more.